you remember back a few weeks ago, I almost said a few years ago. That means that we really lose track of time, don't we? But a few weeks ago, we were in a sermon series entitled Christian Cliches. Those things that people say kind of off the cuff that sometimes can almost be hurtful when we really look at what they mean underneath. Like God doesn't give you more than you can handle, or everything happens for a reason. And then that series was abruptly stopped when I went to Dallas for a few weeks to care for my mother who had fallen and broken her hip. And so when I returned and began to look at the sermon schedule, I was hesitant to pick back up the Christian cliches until I could do them all together, because we had Pentecost Sunday and the next week's graduation Sunday. So when I looked at this Sunday and prayerfully considered if we didn't pick up the Christian cliches again, which I will pick up again in a couple months, and I will finish that series out. But when I looked at today, next week's has the Graduate Sunday when we recognize the graduates. But in looking at today, I really asked God, what would you have me speak on this Sunday? And I recognized that in a couple weeks we will be changing our worship times. And that's a significant change in the life of this church. And I recognize that that's a challenge for some people, that it sort of leaves us unsettled because that's what change does. And yet I feel confident that it is the decision, the right decision to move into as we step into God's vision. But as I thought about facing this change, I thought it would be a good time to remind ourselves, what is worship about? Is it about the time? Is it about the place? Why do we worship? And so I share these words really as almost a teaching lesson to remind ourselves, why do we worship? And so I want you to think about that. Why do you worship? Why do you come to worship? Why are you here this morning? Why have you come to worship over the last many years in your life? And what is the purpose of worship? The psalmist says beautifully in Psalm 100 about worship, about a thanksgiving, a psalm of thanksgiving. And this is a psalm that I actually recite every morning from memory. And yet I'm hesitant to do it here because I'm afraid that my mind will lock down and I will draw a blank. But if you are looking for words to begin your day, I invite you to join with me every morning as I pray Psalm 100 to sort of set the frame of entering into the gift of a new day that God gives us. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is good. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and call upon his name, for the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. A few weeks ago, as I mentioned before, I had gone to Dallas to visit my mom, or to be with my mom for 2 weeks as she recovered from her surgery. And interestingly enough, my return flight home from Love Field Airport, which is Dallas, has two airports. There's Dallas-Fort Worth, which is the larger airport of the two, and then Love Field is a smaller regional airport. One of the main hubs for Southwest Airlines, actually Braniff. For those of you who have a few years on you, remember Braniff Airline. That's where Braniff flew out of. But Southwest Airlines flies out of Love Field, and that's what I was flying. But I wasn't the only one flying out of Love Field that day. Our president, Donald Trump, was flying out of Love Field Airport that day. He had been in Dallas for a convention. And so, unfortunately, our paths didn't cross. I didn't get to see the president, but I felt the effects of him being there because after arriving at the airport to check into my flight, I received a text from Southwest Airlines that said, your flight will be delayed 20 minutes. And I knew that it was probably because of the security with the president. And then I received another text, your flight will now be delayed 40 minutes. And about every I was receiving a text telling me that my flight was more and more delayed. Well, finally, after 2 hours, we boarded the plane. Now, if you've ever flown Southwest, what I love about Southwest is that they're really relaxed. You know, they're not quite as formal as Delta or American, and so you never really know what the flight attendants are going to say. And so we all sat down in our seats, and the flight attendant came over the microphone and she said this. She said, "We are finally leaving Dallas." And everybody just laughed, you know, just sort of like let out this collective sigh, like, yes, you know. I thought about that for a minute, about how we all sort of become one on a plane. And it reminded me about Max Lucado, what he wrote. Max Lucado is a Christian author, and he wrote that people on a plane and people in a pew have a lot in common. Think about it. People on a plane and people in a pew have a lot in common. On the flight, we're all on a journey, and we all take a seat. And some of the passengers pay attention. You know, when the flight attendant gives the instructions, they're paying attention. And then there's some passengers that don't pay attention at all because they just feel like they already know it all, right? After takeoff, some passengers doze, some read books, some watch movies, some talk, others gaze out the window. Those are predictable flights, are they not? And after the plane lands and someone says, "How was your flight?" how do you usually answer? You say, "It was a nice flight." People on a plane and people in the pew have a lot in common. But there are some people who long for more. Picture with me a small boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, and he boards a plane wanting more. And as he comes through the door of the plane, he asks, "Can I meet the pilot?" And his question floats through the air, through the open cockpit door, and the pilot leans over and says, "Is someone looking for me?" And the boy shoots his hand up and he says, "I am." And the pilot says, "Well, come over here." And he lets the boy look into the cockpit. And the little boy sees all the controls and the gadgets and the levers. And then the pilot presents him with a pair of plastic wings. And the little boy says, "Boy, am I glad to be on this plane." Now, few of us would be that excited to be on a plane. We're just travelers wanting to get to our destination. Oh, there might be a young giddy couple who's on their honeymoon. Or there might be an excited grandmother who's flying to see her grandchild for the first time. But then next to her is this fellow in a business suit, and he's cranky, and he opens up his laptop, and he just has a scowl on his face the whole time. But for the rest of us, we just want a nice, predictable, uneventful flight. And that's what we usually get, isn't it? But the little boy wanted more. He wanted to see the pilot. And if you were to ask him to describe his flight, I doubt that he would use the word nice to describe it. He would show you his plastic wings and he would say, "I saw the man who flies the plane." People on a plane and people in the pews have a lot in common. And if you don't believe me, just look around. Some of us are excited to be here. And some of us are sort of cranky. Like I said last year, we've just sort of been in a bad mood for the last year. And some of us, we're just present. We're just content to sit and hope that it's a nice service with very little turbulence. But what if we came to worship like that little boy who got on the plane? What if we came with that childlike enthusiasm, with that wide-eyed wonder, with this excitement and eagerness to meet the pilot? To meet the pilot, to connect with God, to step into the presence of God, to be in a relationship with God. So let me ask you some sort of probing questions, all right? Here's the first one. How passionate are you in your love for God? Now, I know it's hard for some of us to use the word passion in the same sentence that we use the word God, because when we think of passion, our mind kind of goes one way, like hot, steamy romance. And then when we think God, our mind goes to another safer place, right? So let me ask it another way. How do you desire God? Well, those words maybe might do the same thing. Passion and desire take us one direction, God takes us another. So let me try one more time. How intimate is your relationship with God? Okay, intimacy may take us one direction and God takes us another. But here's the truth. Those three words, passion, desire, and intimacy, those are all the words that we can experience in our relationship with God. Passion, desire, intimacy. That's what we experience when we are in a white-hot relationship with God. I love the old story about a man and his wife. It's been around for a while, but the man, he works at a plant, and every day he comes home sort of hot and sweaty and dirty, but this one day he wants to demonstrate how much he loves his wife. He wants his wife to know how much he loves her. And so, before coming home, he showers at the plant and he puts on a suit. And then on his way home, he stops at the wine shop and he picks up a bottle of wine. And he stops at the florist and he picks up a bunch of flowers. And then he comes home, and instead of just going in the back door and throwing all of his stuff down, he goes to the front door to surprise her. And he rings the doorbell. And she comes and she answers the door, and there he is standing with the wine and the flowers, and he says, "Honey, I'm home." And she looks at him with the wine and the flowers and cleaned up and in a suit, and she just burst out crying. And she said, "I've had the most horrible day." She said, "Johnny fell and skinned his knee and broke it open so bad that we had to go to the hospital and have stitches. And then when I got home, the phone rang, and your mother is coming for 2 weeks. And then I went down to the basement to do the laundry, and the washing machine flooded, and now you've come home drunk." Do you remember last week on Pentecost Sunday? Those first Christians, when they were gathered together and the Holy Spirit came down upon them, and they were so filled with joy and passion, what did people say about them? People said they are drunk. But when you are in love, you do some pretty foolish things. And when we come to worship, we come to express our love to God. It is our opportunity to say, "Lord, I love you." And when you love someone, you want to tell them and show them. Now, I know that there are many of us here who are, and myself included, very pragmatic, very utilitarian, very practical, and we're always sort of asking, well, what use is this to me? I mean, what good is this to me? What am I going to get out of it? I think people ask that sometimes when they come into worship, like, what am I going to get out of it today, right? Well, I want you to imagine another scenario with me. Imagine that you are walking along the beach with the person that you love more in this world than anything else. You are walking along the beach on a moonlit night with your beloved, and you're walking hand in hand. And then you stop, and you gaze into one another's eyes, and you kiss. Now imagine that there is a bystander there on the beach who has never been in love. And he asks, what good will that do you? What are you going to get out of that? Well, obviously, this dummy has never been in love. But what was the purpose of the kiss? It was the pure and simple joy of being together. Of being together with the one you love. If someone were to ask me, what is the purpose of worship? Why in the world do Christians come together on Sunday morning and sing songs and listen to sermons and pray prayers and say amen? What is the purpose of worship? I would say, because we are in love. We are in love with a God who loves us. Because we love God with our whole hearts. We come to worship. So, in the words of James in the Holy Scripture, we can draw near to God, and God will draw near to us. Frederick Buechner wrote this about worship. He said, to worship God means to serve God, and there are two ways to serve God. One way is to do things for God that God needs done, like run errands for God, carry messages for God, fight on God's side, feed God's lambs. Those are things that we do for God. But the other is to do things for God that we need to do. To sing songs for God. To create beautiful things for God. To tell God what's on our mind and in our hearts. In general, rejoice in God and make a fool of ourselves the way lovers have always made fools of themselves for the one whom they love. Have you ever given flowers to someone? What is their reaction when you give a gift to someone? They are so excited. What does that do for you? It brings you joy, doesn't it? I've decided that when I retire, that's what I want to do. I want to deliver flowers. Because when you bring a gift like that to someone, it is just, they just light up, right? And we receive more joy in giving than in receiving. That happened to me when I was in Dallas. My mom, when she was nearing the end of her hospital stay, she said, I want to give something to the nurses. I want to give something to the medical staff on the floor. And I said, well, that's easy. I'll just go get a cookie cake. I'll just run to Walmart. I'll run to the grocery store. I'll just get a cookie cake. She said, no cookie cake. That's not good enough. She said, I want you to go to the bundt cake store. I said, oh, the bundt cake store. All right. So there's a store called Nothing But Bundt Cakes. They have them in Charlotte in case you ever want to visit one. They're not just in Dallas. So I went to Nothing But Bundt Cakes and got 12 miniature bundt cakes. Beautiful miniature bundt cakes. Iced, they look like pieces of art. And I took them up to the nurse's station. And it was really a moment that I'll never forget because they saw the box. And then I opened the box and sort of said, these are for you. And they just lit up. That whole staff was so ecstatic. And it brought me more joy than it did them just to see their excitement and their joy and their gratitude. You see, the joy of giving the gift is even greater than the joy of receiving. And the gift we offer in worship is the gift of ourselves. And then the gift we receive is the gift of God's own self. The Westminster Catechism, the Presbyterian Church uses it. They ask their confirmands to memorize this. But the Westminster Catechism begins by asking this question. What is the chief end of man? What is the chief end of man? Many of you may know this. In the praise service, we had two Presbyterians, and I looked at them and I said, would you like to answer? And they just shouted it out, the chief end of man. They said, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That's what we're supposed to do. God is someone to be enjoyed, so worship can be enjoyable. It's not as if we are just enjoying ourselves like this is some form of entertainment. Like we walk through the doors and we're like, okay, give it to me. I'm kind of here. I paid the price of admission. And so I'm here to be entertained. But in worship, we are enjoying God. We are enjoying God's power and God's presence and God's love and God's mystery. We are enjoying God for who God is and loving God with our whole hearts. And when we come to worship with that type of spirit, then we can join with the psalmist and we can say, make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing and know that the Lord is God. Mike Breen is a pastor in England, and he tells a story about his family and the health club that they visit on a weekly basis. He said they enjoy their membership at the health club, and they enjoy all the gym torture of lifting weights and the exercise equipment. But he says that his favorite place for Mike to hang out is the hot tub, right? And then he writes in this story, he says, I was relaxing in the hot tub one day, and my two daughters came running up to me, two teenage daughters, and they said, Dad, you've got to try the sun shower. And Mike said, I don't even know what a sun shower is. And they pointed to the other side of the swimming pool, and they said, it's over there by the pool. You stand in it, and you get a little bit of a tan, but you also get refreshed. It's like standing on the beaches of South Carolina. Now, Mike explains, keep in mind, right, he's a pastor in England. And he says that living in England, they had made a trip over to South Carolina, had enjoyed the beaches for a couple of weeks. And he said that the beaches of South Carolina are the closest thing to perfection that they have found on earth. Living in England, you can probably understand that. And so his daughters were very excited. They wanted him to try this sun shower. And so he agreed to try it. He said, what does it cost? And they said, £1 for 3 minutes. So Mike fished around, found a coin, and he walked over to the sun shower. He opened the door to a room that was about the size of a closet. And nothing looked too dangerous, so he stepped in. He wasn't sure what to do, so he read all the instructions, and he put on the goggles, and he shut his eyes tightly, and nothing happened. And then he remembered, oh, the coin. And so he took the goggles off, and he put the coin in, and then he put the goggles back on, and he closed his eyes, and he could hear this sort of whirring sound, like worried. And he could hear a few clicks. And it sounded like the sound of a fan, but it was nothing wonderful, and in no way did it resemble the beaches of South Carolina. So 3 minutes were up, and the whirring sound stopped, and he stepped out, and the daughter said, what did you think? And he said, I guess I don't get it. I mean, it was okay, but it's probably something that you girls like. And the daughters were really disappointed because they wanted him to share in their experience. So the next week, they're back at the health club, and the daughters come up to their dad with this sort of renewed sense of energy, like, man, we're going to get Dad into this thing, right? Dad, we want you to try it for 6 minutes. Like, maybe you just weren't in it long enough. And so he told them that that's really silly, but, I mean, his daughters sort of gave him these looks that only daughters can give their dad, right? So back in he goes. He steps inside the room. He pulls the door closed. He reads the instructions. He puts the goggles on. He closes his eyes, and nothing happened. And then he remembered, oh, the coin. So he takes the goggles off, and he puts the 2 coins in, and he waited 6 minutes. That's a long time to wait with your eyes shut, simply listening to this whirring air and the clicking of fan noises. Well, when it was over, he took the goggles off, put them on a hook, and he stepped out, and the daughters were waiting for him. How did it go, Dad? Did you feel the effects? And he sort of looked at their expectant faces, and he said, I'm sorry, I really don't think it's for me. I must just be too old. Well, the girls didn't give up that easily, because the next week they were ready, and they had 3 coins. And they gave the coins to their dad, and they said, Dad, we want you to try it for 9 minutes. You'll really love it. You just got to give it some more time. 9 minutes. Come on, Dad. So off he goes to the 3rd time for the sun shower. He goes into the room, closes the door. He reads the instructions. They hadn't changed. Goggles on, eyes shut, and then he remembered the coins. He puts the coins in, puts the goggles back on, closes his eyes. Now, if 6 minutes was a long time, 9 minutes is feeling like an eternity to stand in a dark closet listening to fan noises. So after 6 minutes, he takes a chance, and he opens his eyes, only to see that he could see right through the goggles. And he looked around and he thought, well, maybe I just need to stand closer to the mirror. And then he saw these hooks above the mirror. And then he looked around some more. And then he saw it. A doorknob. Well, what was this? And he turned the doorknob. And the door opened to a room with the most refreshing rays of light. And a breeze that felt like the ocean wind. For 3 weeks, he had been standing in the changing room. All the while missing the experience of the sun shower. I wonder sometimes if it's the same thing for us. Do we ever stand in the changing room wondering, what is so great about being a Christian? Do we attend worship every week and we just sort of go away feeling empty, but others seem to feel refreshed? Do you keep putting your money in the slot, but it's just not working for you and it sort of feels like a sham? Listen. If there is one thing that I want to say to each person here as your pastor, it is this. Jesus is in love with you. And Jesus wants you to come to worship just to enjoy him. Jesus would not have invited you here if he didn't mean it. And Jesus would not have called you into intimacy with God if that intimacy were not possible. And so I invite us all to come to worship expecting to meet the pilot. Because, friends, our purpose in life is to glorify God and enjoy God forever.